My presentation is about the agency and how to look at migrants as social actors, and it's more focused on what happens in the labor market. What happens in the labor market is central to both migrants' lives, and also it has some bearing on class, because a lot of your class positioning is structured by your position in the labor market, not only in Marxist terms of owners of means of production, but also in terms of the social status and social and power that are involved in what you do in the labor market. So this is what I would like to talk to you about, and I'm going to skip the higher skilled because I will not have time for that. And I'll try to go through a little bit of the background, the questions, the data and methods only very briefly. It's part of the Themis project, so you've now probably become very familiar with what kind of data and methods we've been using. And I'll try to do some discussion on the empirical results. So the background for this paper was that migrants have tended to cluster or concentrate in particular jobs, industries, and economic sectors, and though the sectors involved vary across countries. And in addition, the labor market insertion of migrant workers has been consistently associated with these particular characteristics: low status, low wages, hard working, also mismatch between skills and occupations found, as well as de-skilling following migration. There are a number of explanations have been put forward to explain these observed patterns throughout migration. Human capital approaches, both based on inadequacy and also on difficulties of transferring human capital across countries. Discrimination theories, more structuralist perspectives pointing to labor market segmentation, also labor demand, and meso-level factors, social networks, intermediaries that mediate the relationship of migrants with their labor market, but also an increasing tendency to also look at what's migrants' agency in dealing with labor market constraints and conditions. And overall, in studies of work relations and employment relations, this role of agency has been a little unacknowledged. And in addition, there is an ongoing discussion in social sciences of this relationship between agency and structure, and this has also been taken to the migration field. So what I would like to take now is a step towards analyzing with Themis data a little bit of what's the relationship between migrants' agency and structure. Different analytical frameworks have been proposed for understanding agency, and I found this framework useful to work with the data that we have. To look at how agency is related to resistance, to resilience, to reworking, and then to resistance as different levels on which agency may take place, and also is related to the impact of that agency in the outcomes that are achieved. So the main question driving this inquiry into our data is how do migrants act as social actors in the labor market, how they are able to actually influence their working lives, and what is the impact of that for subsequent migrants. Also because of this concern that we have of trying to look at dynamics in the flow and not being very static in looking at just one generation or cohort of migrants. There are some specific questions that I've highlighted, but I think I'm going to skip that. The data we have is on 3 origin groups from Brazil, Morocco, and Ukraine, 4 destination countries, Portugal, UK, Netherlands, and Norway. We have a qualitative sample collected through semi-structured interviews in all these destination countries, and also a survey that was conducted using RDS, respondent-driven sampling. This is a very specific methodology. I will not go into details about it, but it enables us to get access, for one hand, to irregular migrants, for example, or a hard-to-reach population, but it was much more difficult using this methodology to gain access to higher skilled migrants or other more professional migrants. What I'll do now is that I'll focus this analysis not in the whole sample, but I've selected those groups where there was a higher labor market participation. And this was based on those that said that they had worked at least once in the destination country. And these were the groups where that percentage was 85% or higher. And so I'm looking at Ukrainians in the UK, Ukrainians in Portugal, Moroccans in Portugal, Brazilians in the Netherlands, Ukrainians in the Netherlands, Brazilians in Portugal, and in Norway. You see here that the percentage of females in these different groups are varied. Those that have higher percentage of labor market participation are more male-dominated, except in the case of Brazilians in the Netherlands, that it's a group that is very highly, has a high female participation. In terms of motivations, even though these are groups that had a higher participation in the labor market, this is not directly related to the fact that the most important motivation to move was opportunities for work. And this very interestingly comes up in the Brazilian, in all destinations, but more importantly in Brazilians in Norway and Brazilians in the Netherlands. So even though these are groups that had a higher labor market participation, they expressed other motivations for migrating as more important, joining family members or other loved ones, or even to experience the life and culture of another country, or opportunities for studying. These groups, this sample that we got through Themis is a very recent migrant group. They mostly migrated throughout the 2000s. So nearly 70% of these migrants migrated throughout the 2000s, both in the first half and in the second half. And this, of course, limits the comparative ability that we have with previous migration waves for these groups that I'm particularly looking at. So I'll start by looking at who these migrants were on departure from their country of origin. And overall, the level of schooling completed is medium-high. The majority had completed upper secondary school, they're followed by undergraduates, and those with post-secondary vocational training. So this is actually intermediate to highly educated group. There are some specificities per country of origin and destination. So fairly highly qualified group, and on the contrary, Moroccans in Portugal show a particularly low level of education. And there's also polarization, for example, in the case of Norway, with 23% with lower secondary school or less, and then 55% with at least 1 year of undergraduate and postgraduate studies. So there are these differences that can be signaled. In terms of occupational, what kind of occupation they had on departure, we see that a large proportion was not working, either because they were in education or not working by choice or unemployed. Unemployment affected, for example, more the Ukrainians than all of the other groups. And education is certainly an important factor for not being in the labor market prior to migration. We see there are high percentages of associate professional lower management technicians and also skilled manual work or routine clerical sales and other non-manual work. Semi-skilled and unskilled manual work occupy only 9% of this group. But what we see after they migrate, in the first occupation they have upon arrival, is an enormous increase in the proportion that found semi-skilled or unskilled work. And the majority found work as in construction, cleaning, domestic work, waiter bartender jobs, hotels and clubs. These are particularly relevant. And this is, of course, an illustration of the clustering effect that occurs after migration. This is for these the whole groups with different migration histories, different origins, and different destination countries. And so the segment of routine clerical and sales work reduces a lot its importance as the associate professionals and lower management groups. So I'd like to focus just a little bit on what happens for those that found these semi-skilled and unskilled works, and this is outside agriculture and both in agriculture. And the majority of them had this as their first occupation, the most important occupation during the first year after arrival. So there is very limited scope for a quick change after arrival. As for the current occupations, so the occupation that we found at the time of the interview, 58% had moved into the different occupation, and time of arrival matters because this change was most evident for those that had arrived before 2010 than for those that arrived after. The mobility levels are not equal across the countries and origins. There was lower mobility for Brazilians in the Netherlands, for example, and Moroccans in Portugal. But opportunities for mobility seem to be independent from destination or origin because it happens across the board, pointing to specific opportunities that may be available for different migrants in different destinations. So this brings the context where migrants are very importantly. The new occupations are still in semi-skilled or unskilled manual work. There are some move to skilled occupations and very little to the more intermediate qualified professions where the majority of them had actually come from or from occupation. And overall, only 22.5% actually experienced occupation mobility. In addition, the majority of them has temporary titles, 28% were undocumented, and these are factors that highly constrain the agency of migrants in the labor market in order to gain access to better rights and working conditions. The work environment, the 30% work with some persons from the same origin country or with no one from the same origin country. And in addition, 24% work alone. So this is a particular group mostly related to female work. In general, these migrants are not excluded from interactions with other native workers. They are not concentrated in the ethnic niches or from accessing traditional labor organizations and collective labor structured based in the destination country. Yet their involvement, as has been found in other studies, is very low trade union involvement or political involvement and a lot higher involvement with religious organizations or community-based organizations. Despite this initial insertion in the lower segments of the labor market and the limited progression that happened thereafter, migrant self-evaluation of their economic situation and the quality of life after moving is mostly positive. Around 70% indicated that their economic situation and quality of life improved as a result of moving, and only a small percentage considers that it is worse, 11%. And furthermore, in the future, the majority would like to live either part of the year in the country of destination or to remain in the destination country. And I think that this quote illustrates a lot of the kind of level of inequalities that contribute to shape migration flows and that brings the question of inequality to the heart of the understanding of migration. And in addition, I will not have time to go into that, but there are also very nuanced forms of daily negotiation of terms of employment and working and living conditions. And this has been researched in other contexts as well. And beyond the occupation found, so if we forget this structured level of occupation, there have been ways that migrant workers have played out their agency to constitute resilience as well as reworking strategy that contribute to influence the levels of satisfaction in the country. And apart from that kind of horizontal mobility in what's perceived as a more favorable employment setting, there's also a strategy, for example, to please the employer. This availability to comply with the employer's needs, to secure a stable and recognized position in the labor market, that yields rewards not only for within the working sphere, but also, as this respondent illustrates, in response to immigration policies. And there's also this multiple jobs option that migrants engage in that give them access to a combination of perhaps more lower skilled work with other more desired occupations or activities. Just to conclude, And in relation to the question I asked to start with, migrants do play the submissive player when at least upon arrival, because there is very restricted ability to act upon that labor market entry. But they're also social actors. There's some occupational upgrading. There are multiple negotiation strategies that go on. And there's, very importantly, a very positive subjective experience of migration and employment. And not to be forgotten, the structural global level inequalities and their role in shaping migration and work practices, and also the agency that is exercised through more nuanced and daily work place and living condition negotiations. Thank you.